It was around 10 o'clock at night when Jack pulled his van into an empty gas station in rural Kentucky, his headlights still shining through the light rain that was falling like a curtain on the road. He'd been a delivery driver for almost 2 years, ever since he'd returned from the military with a shoulder injury and few opportunities. The days were tough, but the nights were usually even tougher, less because of the deliveries and more because of the thoughts that came to him when the radio went silent. That night, his route had taken him down a back road lined with trees and no cell phone signal. There was no traffic, not a single soul in sight. Then as he rounded a curve, his headlights caught a car parked on the shoulder, its hood open, and a lone woman standing next to it, trying to wave at someone who probably wouldn't come. Jack slowed down instinctively. It wasn't the first time he'd seen someone in trouble, but the scenery, rain, darkness, forest all around, made it more urgent. He pulled over, turned on his hazard lights, and got out slowly, his jacket already soaked in seconds. The woman must have been in her early 20s, shaking more from nerves than from the cold. She said her name was Amelia and that the car had simply stopped, the engine turning off out of nowhere. She had to get to a town about 20 kilometers away, where her father would have an army retirement ceremony at dawn. It was a unique moment, she repeated, visibly shaken, holding her cell phone with no signal and looking at her watch as if that would speed up time. Jack listened attentively, and even though he was tired from his routine and had other deliveries in the system, said he would find a way. Jack knew it would be a lot of work, but he didn't hesitate. He asked Amelia to grab just the essentials from the car and go with him in the van. She quickly got in, still in shock that someone would stop to help without asking a question. Along the way, she explained that her father, a veteran helicopter pilot, had served several missions and that this would be her official farewell, the last time she would wear the uniform, the last time she would fly. He was always there for me. I couldn't miss today, she said, her voice breaking. Jack didn't answer right away. He just nodded, his eyes on the wet road and his mind far away, remembering battalion buddies who never returned. He knew how heavy a moment like that could be. By the time they reached the city center, all the hotels were almost full, but he didn't give up until he found a place where she could get ready for the next morning. Amelia got out, thanking him more than Jack was used to hearing. She wanted to pay for the ride. She insisted several times, but he firmly refused. He said he had already done enough for himself that day, and that if anyone owed him anything there, it was the world with parents like hers. Before leaving, Jack simply wished him good luck and continued with the last deliveries of the night. Inside the van, alone again, he felt a strange mix. Tiredness, yes, but also a kind of relief that he hadn't felt in a long time. He couldn't say why. Maybe because he had done the right thing, maybe because he had felt for a few hours that he was still truly useful. The rest of the night passed like so many others. Boxes, receipts, silence. And when dawn finally came, Jack was already on a new route, ready for another day like so many others, without imagining what was yet to come. The sun was still struggling to break through the heavy clouds of the previous morning when Jack stopped in a residential neighborhood to drop off a package. He was tired as usual, but already accustomed to the pace. His life was simple. He woke up early, drove miles, ate whatever he could, and slept when his body asked for it. There was no room for surprises, and perhaps that was why he didn't immediately understand what was happening. The sound of the rotors came from nowhere, loud, cutting through the air above the houses with unmistakable precision. Jack looked up with a frown. He recognized that sound like few others. A military helicopter, and not just any helicopter. It was a Black Hawk. When it landed on the grassy area of a nearby field, kicking up dust and attracting the attention of everyone around, Jack was still standing there, trying to understand what the hell an army helicopter was doing out there in the middle of nowhere. He watched curiously until he saw someone getting off the plane. It was Amelia, her hair tied up in a bun and dressed with discreet elegance. Behind her was an older, imposing man in an impeccable ceremonial uniform and shiny decorations on his chest. It was the colonel. The approach was slow, almost solemn, as if each step carried weight. Jack didn't know what to do. He remained there with the van open, a box in his hand, not understanding whether he was being called, decorated, or mistaken for someone else. When Amelia reached him, she smiled as if she were seeing someone important again. Without ceremony, she introduced her father. "This is Jack, Dad. He's the one who saved me last night." The colonel held out his hand firmly and with gratitude visible in his eyes. He didn't say many words, but he made a simple gesture. He took a small sealed envelope from his pocket and handed it to Jack, saying only that it was a way of acknowledging what cannot always be repaid with words. Jack held the envelope, unsure of how to react. He wasn't the kind of guy who expected rewards. And all this, helicopter, decorated officer, formal thanks, seemed like an exaggeration compared to what he had done on pure instinct. He thanked her, still a little embarrassed, and looked inside the van as if he wanted to go back to what he knew. Packages, labels, deliveries. But Amelia insisted that he open it right there. When he broke the seal and saw what was inside, it took him a few seconds to process it. It was a considerable amount of cash, neatly organized in a discreet wad, accompanied by a short note, "So that you never forget the value of being who you are." Jack was silent. The colonel just nodded, turned elegantly, and walked back to the helicopter. Amelia, before boarding, looked one last time and said, "If it weren't for you, I would have missed my father's last flight. Thank you for making a difference." As the helicopter took off, Jack stood there, envelope in hand, dust from the takeoff still swirling in the air. He didn't know exactly what to do. That money was more than he'd earned in months of work, enough to pay off debts, fix his van, maybe even change his life. But the biggest impact wasn't the money itself. It was the fact that for a moment, someone had seen value in him, not as a former soldier, not as a delivery man, but as a human being. As he climbed back into the van, he sat in silence for a few minutes. He picked up his phone, looked at the calendar, and realized it had been exactly 3 years since he'd left the military. 3 years of feeling invisible. And now, in a matter of hours, someone had come across the sky to tell him that he still mattered. Jack didn't immediately return to his delivery route. Instead, he drove to an empty parking lot behind a gas station and turned off the engine. He sat there in the van, watching the rain slowly start again, as if the sky too was trying to come to terms with what had just happened. He picked up the envelope again, opened the note once more, and read it slowly, trying to absorb every word, "So that you never forget the value of being who you are." That had moved him more than the amount of money. For a long time, Jack had felt irrelevant, as if everything he had done in the past was behind him, without any weight in the present. In that moment, he realized that a simple act of humanity had not only changed someone else's destiny, but had also rewritten, however subtly, his perception of himself. Later, with the van back on the road, Jack began to think about what he would do with the money. He wasn't the kind of man who dreamed of luxury, but there were old promises he had never been able to keep. He remembered his uncle's garage that had to close due to lack of support, his veteran friends who were trying to start over without structure, his sister who was raising 2 children alone after her husband left. He thought that maybe this was his chance to give back, not with grand gestures, but with actions that, like that night with Amelia, would make a real difference to someone. He didn't decide everything there and then, but he knew he wasn't going to simply save that money as a lucky prize. This was something else. It was recognition, a reminder that there was still room in the world for small acts of courage, and that sometimes they come back to you in the most unexpected ways. In the days that followed, Jack told almost no one about the story. He continued working as usual, delivering packages from door to door, smiling when he was told thank you, ignoring people passing him by as if he were part of the sidewalk. But inside, something had changed. For the first time in a long time, He felt like he had a purpose again, not just to complete his route, but to see the people around him more deeply. The experience with Amelia had ignited a fire he hadn't even known was still there. One day, when he saw an elderly woman struggling to carry bags on the wet sidewalk, he stopped the van without thinking and helped her. He didn't want praise or payment. He just remembered what someone had done for him by acknowledging his gesture. It was as if the world had given him a sign that it was still possible to make a difference, even in the smallest details. The following week, Jack decided to use part of the money to renovate the van, which had been threatening to give up for months. He invested in new tires, a full service, and for the first time, installed a decent sound system. But it wasn't just about comfort. He also started setting aside part of the remaining money for a simple fund, something that could help veterans in need. People like him, who were facing life after military service, trying to keep their heads up, even when no one was looking. He created a small network with 2 battalion buddies and began spreading the word on social media. The project was modest but sincere. It didn't involve the spotlight or big campaigns. It was just someone who had been helped wanting to help in return. That stormy night with Amelia had left its mark, but not like scars. It was as if he had finally found a piece of himself that he thought was lost forever. A month later, Jack received an envelope in the mail with no return address clearly marked, but a military postmark in the corner. Inside was a handwritten letter. It was from the colonel. He said his retirement had been more meaningful than he could have imagined, not just because of the ceremony, but because he had the opportunity to see his daughter arrive on time, thanks to a stranger with the spirit of service still intact. At the end of the letter, the colonel said something that had been playing in Jack's head for days. "You didn't just save a daughter from arriving at her father's event. You reminded us what it means to serve, even out of uniform." Jack read it as he sat at the kitchen table, a cold coffee by his side, feeling a different kind of pride, one that no longer depended on medals or missions or applause. It was a quiet pride, but a firm one. For the first time in a long time, he felt whole. Inspired by the letter and the small acts he had been doing, Jack began writing about his experiences on a simple blog where he told stories about the streets, the deliveries, and the invisible people he met along the way. He didn't expect an audience, but the texts began to circulate. People from all over the world began sending him messages, saying that they felt the same way he did, that they also thought they had been forgotten, that they thought they would never do anything important again. This became a kind of silent fuel for Jack. He still woke up early, still got caught in the rain, still struggled with GPS that failed. But now everything seemed different. The weight of his routine was lighter. The steering wheel of the van seemed to carry more than just merchandise. It also carried small possibilities for change, and above all, the certainty that his story was still being written. One morning, while drinking coffee at a roadside gas station, Jack overheard 2 truck drivers talking about a guy in the white van who helped people around town. They didn't know who he was, but they were talking about how this guy never let anyone down. Jack remained silent, pretending not to hear, but inside he felt something hard to describe. It wasn't vanity or inflated pride. It was a kind of gratitude for being part of something bigger than himself once again. When he got back on the road, he realized that he didn't need explicit recognition to keep going. The transformation that had happened in him that rainy night was permanent. It no longer had to do with the money he had received or the colonel's gesture. It had to do with the fact that by helping someone without expecting anything in return, he had reclaimed an essential part of who he was. A short time later, he ran into Amelia again by chance at a veterans fundraiser. She was with her father, who was now in civilian clothes and seemed more relaxed, as if he could finally rest. When she saw Jack, she smiled with a genuine twinkle in her eyes, and the 2 embraced like old friends. They spoke briefly, but with a lightness that only those who have shared something meaningful can have. Before they left, Amelia said, "You didn't just bring me to my father. You reminded us that there are still people who care." That sentence stayed with Jack for the rest of the day. It was simple, direct, but it summed it all up. In the end, it wasn't about grand gestures or what you get in return. It was about being there at the right time, doing the right thing, even when no one is looking. The months passed and life resumed its natural rhythm. Jack continued to drive his van, now with greater confidence, less financial worries, and a new sense of direction. But what had changed most was not visible. It was internal. He began to observe people more, to recognize in the small details that he had previously ignored. The tiredness in someone's eyes, the haste of someone carrying a burden, the silence of someone who simply needed to be seen. And with each new delivery, he carried more than packages. He also carried a reminder to himself that even far from the battlefield, he was still useful, still valuable. With every mile he drove, Jack felt like he was rebuilding something that had been lost over the years. Not his career, not his status, but his very identity. And it was only later, on an ordinary night, stopped at a red light, that he really understood everything. As he watched the reflection of the headlights on the wet road, he remembered the storm that night, the stalled engine, Amelia's desperate look, and the weight of that simple decision to stop the van and help. That hadn't been luck or fate. It had been a choice, and it was that choice that changed everything. The money helped, of course, but what really changed his life was being reminded, even if only for a few moments, that he was still part of something bigger. And that, more than any reward, was what kept him going. Jack never felt invisible again. And even though no one knew his name, he knew exactly who he was. Over time, Jack realized that overcoming obstacles didn't come from a helicopter landing near his van, or from an envelope stuffed with cash. It came from the moment he chose to act without knowing that anyone was watching. The real turning point happened there, on the dark shoulder of the road, when he stopped his van in the middle of a storm to help a stranger. That wasn't a heroic act. It wasn't planned. It was human. And perhaps that's what the world needs to remember more often, that you don't have to save the planet to change a life. You just have to be present, do the right thing, even when no one tells you to or rewards you. Jack didn't make the news. He didn't win medals. But he gained something he had lost years ago, the certainty that he still had something to offer. Today, he is still on the road, with the same van, the same uniform, and the same spirit. But inside, everything has changed. He no longer waits for miracles, nor does he resent what he left behind. He simply carries on day after day with a clear conscience and a lighter heart. Sometimes he still meets people who need help, and when that happens, he stops without thinking twice. Because now he knows it is not the grand gestures that change a life. It is the small choices made with the right heart at the right time. And as simple as it may seem, it was that choice, made on a rainy night, on a forgotten road, that changed Jack forever.